And what this comes down to is the point that I want to make. Well, if you think of all the factors that come down to what causes a population to decline, there's all sorts of reasons. Obvious one is bad economy. Bad economy, people don't feel like they have enough savings to have a stable marriage. That's definitely something that's happening nowadays. I mean, young people nowadays have no job security compared to the older generations. A lot of people who are no question. I have friends who are postponing the idea of marriage, until they can save some more money or until they feel a bit more like they have a bit extra that they can contribute to that. So there's definitely the economy in decline. But there again, the birth decline started during the bubble. In fact, before the bubble. So it went through this huge rise and decline, and the population's been declining throughout. No question, economic decline contributes to it. But then there's another thing which, I don't know, I mean, you look at prosperity, you consider the Scandinavian countries, when they've been doing very well, they've also seen population or birth rate decline. I think there's an interesting thing from there as well, and maybe it's the opposite side of the coin in some ways. I think what it comes down to, and Roland Kelts were featured in this BBC thing, and although I hated the fact that the whole thing was focused on these guys who were dating their Nintendo machines, living and they were walking through Akihabara at the time, and you can tell that the BBC line was pushing it all towards Japanese are these hopeless, overly mothered geeks, and I thought it was very patronizing and sexist towards men the way that it showed it, but he made a great point, even though they tried to push him down the road of this context. The point is that there's a lot of distractions. And it's a kind of a paradox. Japanese society is great to be in. There's so many things to do. It's such a complex, compact. There's so many people in Japan. There's so much human culture. There's so many things you can do. Art, hobbies, sport. There's so many distractions that you can have a really fulfilling life. And at the same time, and it's kind of a paradox, the economy is kind of crap. So you've got all these things to do, and even with the economy being crap, you can still do those things. And not only that, but on top of that, I think you have this culture, which again goes back maybe to the 60s. And I've actually heard a theory once that this whole idea of living alone, that the construction companies built all of these single room kind of apartments. This is something that I've heard of a story that this happened. I've never seen anything to back it up. This could be totally false. But during the left wing, right wing, online, the university struggles during the Vietnam War in the 60s in Japan. This is when you had the birth of the Red Army and some famous, terrorist groups and ideological battles. The construction companies, which traditionally favored the government and the right wing in Japan, cooperated on a scheme to basically break up these Japanese dorms where this kind of a radical ideology spread, and to provide cheap single-person housing. I don't know if that's true or not, but where I come from, that's quite rare. At least it was when I left. When I was at university, you'd go from home to sharing apartments with your schoolmates to living with girlfriends to getting married. Not this idea of having a whole home or a whole apartment to yourself is something you don't really get to. You're like a middle-aged bachelor and divorced. But in Japan, you go straight from living at home to living completely alone. I think it fosters kind of a self-centered, partly self-centered, but certainly a very individualistic lifestyle, which I think makes it very, very hard to live and accommodate other people. It makes it harder. You don't learn the skills of living with other people and getting along with other people and being in relationships. And when you can have such a great time living alone, I mean, I lived in like a $600 a month apartment in the far northern suburbs of Tokyo for 2 or 3 years. I had no money. I barely saved any money any month. I was paying back my student loan, and I didn't make that much. I made like about $1,500 in the hand. And, between rent and expenses, I only was able to actually go out with, maybe $500 or $600 a month, and I go out every weekend. I mean, I lose money each month. And I had a great time. I dated a lot. I went out to lots of concerts and stuff like that. I definitely was but there again, so I can see this thing. I'm having a great time. I'm surfing. I'm going out to the best concerts and the best nightclubs in the world. And yet I have no financial or economic stability during that time to get married or to think about that. So why would you? So, I think this is kind of paradoxical. You think about places that have high birth rates. And again, stereotype alert, but, why did people used to have, in the 50s, 8 kids, and why do they now have 1 kid? Well, there's no question there's a lot more to do now, even if people were relatively more prosperous back in the 50s or whatever. and certainly it's a thing in Japan. There seem to be, this again, I could be wrong about this, there's higher migration rates. Young people have nothing to do in rural Japan, and a lot of them migrate to Tokyo, and Tokyo's population grows because of that internal migration. But there's nothing really to do in a lot of the small towns in Japan. And where there's nothing to do, where people idle hands find things to not be idle with, and hence babies get made. So I don't know. I mean, to my mind, it's interesting. I think in a way, Japan is almost overly successful as a culture. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. It's not just Japan. And I don't know if exactly the same factors that come into it with Singapore, with South Korea, with Italy or Slovakia. These are very, very different countries with very, very different circumstances. But I would say in Japan, that the fact is what they all culminate in. I mean, it's very simplistic saying that these men are just selfish. Man children. The BBC going down this line of bashing Japanese men, which is okay to do for some reason. It's not good to make fun of black people or black men or black women, or you have to be sensitive about every race except Japanese men, and I think they are fairly beat up on them because it's both men and women. But the fact is that it's a difficult economy and society to get married in right now, and it's a very easy society, even if you're not rich, to be single and broken in Japan, and with an unstable economic future. And I think that's what drives it myself. So I'm going to have to switch here very soon. I'm going to have to log in. Everybody check out the very first comment, Comical Reina. Comical Reina's channel. I'm going to be going over there on a hangout very, very soon. And I'll be talking in Japanese live for an hour in Japanese about this topic and anything else. Honestly, this is a little bit heavy actually for Comical Reina's channel, but the whole point is I don't want to talk about like sex. I want to talk about there's so many other much more important and subtle factors which come into this. And yes, and by the way, so the Taste 1962 mentions Tokyo bias. I'm completely Tokyo biased. And like New Yorkers are probably New York biased when they talk about America. I'm probably more so Tokyo with Japan, absolutely. And by the way, so my perception that there's nothing to do in the countryside, that's probably what that's about. Yes, that's probably true, but people, you do hear about the bigger families and so on. The more you get into the countryside, depends on where you go, of course. But no, I'm absolutely biased and completely ignorant about countryside Japan. I admit that. But no, so everybody, come and see Comical Reina's channel. You can click on her name. She's the very first comment on this thread, and in 5 minutes, I will be talking live in Japanese with her. On her hangout on Hiko-chan and Rei-chan's Omoshiro Talk. We do once a month. I think it's the first, this is the second, but it's around the first Sunday every month. We do a live show together, and it is awesome. And yes, no, Lightsander is talking exactly about what pissed me off. The 43-year-old otakus dating their game machines. I mean, honestly, I could go to the UK and I could be talking about, what's wrong with British society, and I could find 2 British National Party skinheads and talk with them and say that they represent young British men. And you know what? On many levels, that would actually be a reasonable thing to do. But just in the same way, I mean, most British people would be outraged to see British national people representing the whole population when they're like a 0.1%. Even if you can tie in some things that are true about the economic state, about the views of immigrants or whatever, which have proven to be very broad. But this woman's done the same thing, and she's done it with otaku in order to fulfill this kind of stereotype. And these old, tired old stereotypes, which become these kind of self-reinforcing stereotypes of, and it's funny how Japan was too hentai before, and now it's gone sexless, and people are linking it all by saying, oh, they got so hentai they became sexless because they're dating their games machines now, or robots or something. That's just dumb. It's retarded, and it's really annoying. I mean, honestly, BBC is just making this stuff up when they get that far, or, even if you can find people who talk about that in Japan, it's such a small, and it's so detached from the actual issues. It just shows that they're not really interested in the issues. They're interested in making an interesting TV show, which means that the BBC has become news of the world, which is sad, but that's what it is. There's where is the good news? Honestly, I mean, Al Jazeera, even Al Jazeera, I mean, on Japan, it's really hard to find because it's so easy to get cheap, easy ratings. Just talking on the stereotypes that everyone knows. Just say the Japanese men are chauvinistic, creeps, and the women are easy, and it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense, but that's how we go. So, I'm going to wrap up soon. So everybody, please do me this favor. Come over. If you can understand Japanese, even if you can't understand Japanese, we can answer. We can speak. We can both speak English. She's practically Canadian. I'm practically Japanese. We can do this. Click on Comical Reina's very first comment. Look in the thread. Go up. Click on her channel or go to her channel. Just search Comical Reina on YouTube. I'm about to go and log in onto that, and it is going to be awesome. I'm going to stay on this as I onto that. This is very, very short. That's what I want to talk about. Let's talk about what causes a society's population to drop, what causes it to increase, and which factors are relevant to Japan, and how is it different to Italy or Sweden or Canada, for example, or New Zealand? Like, what, is it that men are dating their Nintendo machines? Is that the problem? Is the BBC really right about that? Because I think, I was really, really seriously aggravated watching that. And the